Hello and welcome to EDN540, Facilitating Adult and Lifelong Learning. My name is Vignesh and today I'll be presenting Assignment 3, which is the Adult Learning Practicum project. There is a written component to this assignment as well. The purpose of this assignment is to present learning and teaching strategies and theories that I've applied within my workplace and learning context. So let's begin. So to introduce myself, my name is Vignesh. I'm a registered midwife. I provide midwifery care to pregnant women, babies and their families. I work across all areas of maternity and I work with collaboratively with the multidisciplinary team. Part of my role also involves referring care into allied health care workers. And a large part of my job also involves playing an educational role towards facilitating learning for student midwives and graduate midwives. I have played the role of graduate coach, whereby I work one-on-one clinically with the graduate midwives who have come through where I've worked. And so this presentation will discuss how I've used various learning strategies to facilitate adult and lifelong learning for them. So to start off with, this is something that I have discussed in my first assignment about PPK and knowing your learner. So I think it's extremely important to understand your learner and appreciate your learner to start with. And a large portion of this is done through knowing your learner's PPK or prior practical knowledge. Prior practical knowledge is influenced by an individual's personal beliefs, ideologies, cultural and emotional constructs, and even personal biases. And this relates to neuroscience, which we'll talk about in a moment. But the neural networks influence a person's actions, choices, and interactions. By acknowledging a learner's PPK, you're creating a safe and inclusive environment for them because you're valuing your learner's life experiences, prior knowledge and prior practice, and they feel included and appreciated and feel like an asset to the organization rather than a liability or, just tagging along with the facilitator or the teacher. So it is so important to appreciate and value your learner to begin with. And every learner that you have brings a wealth of knowledge because everyone's been through different life paths and they have got different experiences, different skills that they bring to the job. So very important to start off by knowing your learner. And I think I've stuck by that. So in getting to know your learner and appreciating their skills, I have used the technique called appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry is sort of the opposite of problem-based learning. Problem-based learning, you focus on the deficits, whereas appreciative inquiry, you appreciate the strengths of an individual or a team or an organization, and you collaboratively come together to form a proposal or something to implement for the organization. And that's what I've used in one of my activities at work to appreciate the current strengths that graduate midwives have in breastfeeding education. And we actually worked together to develop a tool to help support breastfeeding women. And that worked really well. Because it really highlighted to the graduate midwives that they already had the knowledge that they needed, because a lot of them thought that they were not good at breastfeeding education, but then the more we dug, the more they realized that they already had all the knowledge that they needed, which is fantastic. We used Think, Pair, Share, which I'll talk about later as well. But a part of during appreciative inquiry, I realized that the midwives that had a little bit more experience were more forthcoming with their knowledge, and they're sharing, whereas the students were a bit more reserved. And I suppose this has got to do with neuroscience again, whereby if you feel confident with your practice, you're more likely to want to share and give a bit more information than if say you haven't had much experience in that field, and that is your mind protecting itself, and that's very common and natural that people do that. And during the appreciative inquiry, we also covered on the learner and the organization, sort of, especially in midwifery, within the context of midwifery, it is very important to appreciate the strengths of the learner, but it's also important to realize the objectives and the purpose of the organization, because in midwifery, the organizational purpose is to provide safe, efficient midwifery care, and it's really important that the midwives also appreciated that and received that and acknowledged that and accepted that. So that was one method that I've used. The other thing that I've adapted and I really like is Brookfield's critical reflective practice framework, which relates back to metacognitive practice in midwifery. So with Brookfield's critical reflective practice framework, there are 4 components. One is reflection from the self, the other from the students, the other colleagues, and the last one is scholarship. So I actually used this framework to present and adapt a 4-step approach towards debriefing women who have had traumatic birth experiences. So I really enjoyed using this framework because it was so interesting. And the way that I adapted it is that I used each of these components to suit midwifery. So within the context of debriefing women who have had traumatic birth experiences, the self part of the reflection was the reflection of the midwife. So why did she or he do the certain steps that they did, and how could they have improved their practice better in that particular clinical incident, like a postpartum hemorrhage, for example. And then the students, I adapted that to be the women. So how did the women feel about the steps that were taken to manage that traumatic experience for them? And then the third one being colleagues, so the multidisciplinary team, mainly the doctors, their perspectives on how the situation was managed. And lastly, scholarship is the theory. So how did we as an organization use the policies and guidelines of managing a postpartum hemorrhage? How did we use that to manage the postpartum hemorrhage? So I've adapted this framework to suit midwifery because it actually gives a very comprehensive and holistic approach towards debriefing with women, because it explores all views and approaches involved in that clinical incident. And I think it was well received because it was good to consider all points of views. So midwives, women, doctors, and the organizational frameworks. So this worked really well with sort of getting the students and the grad midwives to think about how in the future they would help with debriefing women after a traumatic birth experience. So making sure that they cover all 4 views and all 4 points so that women get the appropriate follow-up and counselling that they might need. And this is, again, demonstrative of collaborative practice in midwifery that we do every single day. The next one, so think, pair, share, that I spoke about earlier. So think, pair, share, as you know, it's pretty self-explanatory. You think about the experience that you've had, you pair up with a friend and you share your experiences. And what this does is that it promotes critical thinking skills and reflective practice in midwifery, because you don't always have time during a clinical emergency to rationalize your thoughts and actions, but this method, this learning strategy provides time for midwives to reflect their thoughts and rationalize their thoughts. And it allows one another, so you understand your peers and why they did a certain, why they had a certain management or an approach to a clinical incident. And it allows you to understand your colleagues' perspectives, which really it builds on emotional intelligence. And that's what I really like about Think, Pair, Share. It's really, it almost becomes a little bit informal, and it opens up, like, we all just kind of sit in a circle and talk about our experiences, and it creates a very respectful environment for people to talk about their feelings without feeling judged, because you lay down those rules to start with. That this is you prime the space basically to say that this is a safe space for us to share. And I really like this method of sharing because, like I said, it really builds your emotional intelligence. You get to know the different perspectives of different people and why they've done it a particular way. The next framework that I've used is Bowman's 4C's facilitation. And the thing that I've realized is that it is so similar to simulation-based learning. So Bowman's 4Cs and simulation-based learning pretty much share the same philosophies and pathways, because it is about applying theoretical knowledge to professional practice. And that's exactly what simulation-based learning is. So you start off simulation with acknowledging what the learner already knows, what they need to know, and how they would practice it. So can they do it? Are they able to practice it? And can they teach someone? And what can you do in the future? So how can it be used in the future? So I've been involved in the prompt training, which is an obstetric emergency training, and that has to do with simulation-based learning. And it really helps develop clinical skills because it gives people the time to think, which is often not an option in a real life situation. Simulation-based learning doesn't replace real life learning, but it is really effective in the sense that, again, it allows for people to discuss why they used a certain management and why they used a certain way of practice. It really builds also the communication skills and peer-to-peer interactions. And I just like, the more that I was reading through Bowman's 4C's facilitation, and I realized how similar it is to what we do with simulation-based learning. And I've used it many times in my practice. So I've found that really, really effective with learning. Now, going on to creating positive, safe, and psychologically inclusive environments for learning. This is a big thing that I believe in strongly, and I feel like I have done throughout my practice. And to explain it, I've got a little diagram. In my opinion, these are the three very important parts of the brain that we use in midwifery every single day in our practice, subconsciously, but we don't really think about it. So the prefrontal cortex, it receives all the information and it assimilates it, and it allows you to make informed decisions. The hippocampus, that is responsible for your learning and your storage of memory. The amygdala, which is very important for the regulation of emotions, fear, any kind of, sadness, anger, everything. So that regulates all your emotions. When the amygdala is open or receives, for over a period of time, receives or is subjected to lots of stressful situations, it doesn't regulate those emotions very well, and it doesn't help us make very good decisions. So it's really important to sort of think of, I know we use it subconsciously, but consciously to think about that and be aware that, creating a safe environment for learning is so essential, because your learners need to be able to regulate their emotions and feel safe. When you feel safe, you make good decisions. So especially in a highly stressful environment. So it's really important to keep that in mind when you are facilitating adult, learning for anyone, but in this context, learning for adults. And there are a number of ways in which you can do this. Um, it's through creating an environment which allows learners to develop self-awareness, relationship and communication skills, and be able to voice their thoughts without feeling judged or, ridiculed or, like they're not saying the right thing. It doesn't, so creating a positive environment and a safe and inclusive environment for learning doesn't mean that you're compromising on high standards of care, because emotionally safe environments in midwifery and high standards of care they can coexist. So it is important to, say, for example, it's about building a rapport with your learner, getting to know your learner and giving them value and letting them know that they're an accepted member of the team and their contribution is important to the organization. Um, Trying to break down the hierarchical barriers is so important because, you don't want your learner to be fearful or intimidated by the environment that they're learning in. The one thing that I've always done is we've got many situations or clinical situations that our learners are afraid to be in because they're afraid of doing the wrong thing. It is so important to be supportive of that, but let them know that it is a really good opportunity for learning and support them through it. So telling them, like, for example, when I worked with my grads, it was about working one-on-one with them and letting them know that I was there to work with them and I was going to be supporting them through those potentially stressful situations. So you have to, in midwifery at least, you have to sort of encourage your learner to embrace those situations because they are great learning points. The other thing is, acknowledging achievements, big or small. So when you're an experienced clinician, you sort of forget that simple things like putting a catheter in is normal for you. But then when you've got a student and they've done it for the first time, it is a big achievement for them. So acknowledging that and telling them that you've done a really good job, giving them good feedback, not, oh, well done, but you did this really well. You had great documentation. You communicated well with the women in a family. You were appropriate with your questions. You were a safe practitioner. So giving them really good feedback is so important with creating a positive and safe, inclusive environment. And also giving them the right to pass. So, it is sometimes in midwifery, you've got some really stressful days, and acknowledging that they might have had a really stressful day the day before and saying and suggesting to them that, would you like to maybe, care for a labouring woman instead of caring for someone that has had a postpartum hemorrhage and a shoulder dystocia and all of that. So giving them the option to pass on something that they've done that is potentially has been challenging for the past 3 days. So those sorts of things applying within midwifery to create a safe environment for learning. The other thing is knowing when to strike a balance between self-directed and collaborative learning. It is so important for adult learners to be self-directed, definitely. So knowing your own objectives and goals is so important, but it's also really important within midwifery to collaborate with your colleagues and your peers to further develop on your learning, because I'd have strengths and I've got things that I want to learn, but how would someone else have managed that situation and can I get some tips from them? What kind of knowledge could they share with me? They might know something that I don't know. So being open to that collaborative learning, and striking a balance between self-directed learning and collaborative learning is so important. And I think that I've encouraged that within the midwives that I work with. And lastly, we've got challenges in our organisation, like everyone does. So we do have a fair bit of challenge from senior clinicians who go, well, this is not how we've done it before, when they're faced with something new, something they haven't used before, a learning strategy, for example. And this is going from the, you've got to try and get them to go from the fixed mindset to the growth mindset, which is not always easy. You've always got power imbalances and hierarchies in midwifery. You've got diverse personalities that you work with, and you've always got to work with these strong, diverse personalities because it's a very collaborative workplace environment. So these are all challenges because they do send your brain into fight or flight mode most of the times, because you either fight the situation or you run away from it. It's human nature. The way that I think that I've managed all these challenges is leading by example. I'm still working on it, but and I also that's what I say to the grads that I work with, is to lead by example. Say, for example, if you've got a midwife or someone that's been in the job for 30 years and they're like, well, this is not how we've done it before. Acknowledge that, appreciate that, but still do what potentially could lead to a better outcome, because them seeing the progress and the development by using the new learning strategy, for example, could potentially make them go from the fixed mindset to the growth mindset. Not all the time, but at least you've led by example, because that is the best. I think that is the best way to encourage organizational transformation. I'd say not change, but transformation, because it is by showing people that actually this works, and why don't we just try it? So I am a big believer of leading by example, and I think I have done that within my midwifery practice. So has my practice aligned with my learning philosophy discussed in assignment 1? I think it has over the semester. Definitely, I have definitely acknowledged, like I do give a lot of importance to my learners. I want to know them. I want to be on the same level with them. I want to know what their purpose is, know what their values are, their objectives are, and then I sort of facilitate learning for them, because I learned so much from it as well, but really it's about helping them to develop on their skills and their practice. And I think I've definitely sort of tried to keep that in mind while I facilitated learning for them. I have, through all these little assignments and presentations, I think I've sort of, given some sort of reason for my colleagues to think about the learning strategies that I've used, which is again leading by example. So yes, I do think my practice has aligned with my philosophy, which I've discussed in assignment 1. These are my references, and this brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.